data centers. And they basically said that in order for the U.S., they said, to beat China in AI, it was necessary to end private car ownership in the United States and instead have autonomous, Waynos basically drive every fleets of them, Uber everybody around to where they were supposed to go, and have things, sort of planned out by AI, like where people are going, where people are working, and all of this. And so the Technocracy Inc. model that you highlighted earlier, it was really influenced by things like Taylorism and a lot of these schools of thought that came out of the Industrial Revolution that prioritize efficiency above all else. Having the trains run on time and all of that stuff being, the kind of obsession of these people in that particular era. And so they want to sort of apply that not just to industry, but to micromanaging people's lives as they, extract and exploit us for data and how much money our serf-like lives will make for them.
So is there anybody in Ohio? I know Dennis Kucinich is from Ohio. Is there anybody making a stink about this, or is there any kind of organizations that are pushing back in a meaningful way against this?
I mean, there's some local neighbors that have organized, but unfortunately, you have the case of Wexner, for example. So he's mainly funded the Republican Party in Ohio, but he also funds people on the Democrat Party. So it really depends on which politician isn't beholden to extremely wealthy donors in the area, or isn't taking money from either Wexner-connected interests or big tech-connected interests. Hopefully, I'm sure there's some of them, but a lot of the state legislatures, unfortunately, seem to be pretty bought out, especially if their response to all the public furor over data centers in their state is to create a commission that dispels inaccurate myths about data centers. It's just like, that should be a red flag there. I'm sure there are organizations trying to do something. I know that some of the people that sued Jobs Ohio when they were created, like Progress Ohio, and I think there's another one called the Project 1881, or I can't remember what it's called, but it's basically a constitutional law think tank or something. But they fought against Jobs Ohio. That may be a good way to start, tackling this sort of system, because it's honestly just like an absolutely insane organization that uses the liquor tax to funnel all this dark money wherever it wants. It really shouldn't be considered unconstitutional. It's just really up to local people seemingly at this point. And some of the articles I was reading when I was writing this piece about local pushback to the data centers are just regular people living in somewhat rural areas trying to organize on things like Facebook and stuff. I mean, they don't really know what to do, but I commend them for trying to do something, because I don't think we can just sit back and let this happen. I mean, something has to be done if you care about what's happening in your backyard. And as I said, a couple times, a lot of effort is being put into making us pay attention to anywhere but here, and arguably by design to an extent, because if the data centers are already built and all of this infrastructure is in place, it's already there, it goes live. I mean, the time to complain will have passed by then. Now is the time to try and do something about it.
It seems like Ohio is like this new kind of petri dish, this testing ground for this type of thing.
This is what it sounds like.
And, if so, what early warning signs should residents and the public be watching for?
As far as these data centers moving in, it usually starts with land offers from these companies. So the main one operating in the Columbus region is Wexner's New Albany company. They come and they offer you a price on your land that's a few percentage points over market price, and then if you take the deal, you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement with the New Albany company. And then, they take your land and they sell it to Intel to build a giant plant that got a bunch of money from Biden's CHIPS Act in 2022, right? So, basically it's the land offers is how you know they're coming in, and they don't necessarily, it wasn't like Intel was knocking on doors in that area, trying to buy people's lands. It's these other companies that are doing it. So in this particular, in the Columbus region, it's the New Albany company, but there's other companies that are operating like this throughout the country, and it would be good to, shine the light on them and let people know to not sell their land to these guys. But unfortunately, I mean, it's absolutely egregious that efforts have been made to prevent state or local governments from doing anything, because clearly the federal government wants this to happen throughout the country. So if they're trying to take state and local authority away to stop this kind of stuff, I mean, that's a huge issue. So I think the easiest way is to try and stop new ones from being made, and a lot of that involves changing zoning laws and things like that. And then pay particular attention to local elections where the people that are involved on either those commissions or those city councils who make those votes keep the people that are funded by big tech and by these industries out of there as much as possible. And if you don't see any that are running, maybe run yourself. I mean, what else can you do? I mean, this is something that's happening everywhere. It's not even exclusive to the United States. Maybe a lot of the data center stuff is right now, but I don't think it'll stay there. This is intended to be kind of a global system. So, maybe they'll balkanize things first and sort of decentralize to re-centralize at some point. But, they're trying to tether all of this together. And it's really time for people to, pay attention to what's happening where they live and try and stop this stuff too, instead of, constantly being distracted by the latest psyop. It's important to remember where you actually live and live in reality sometimes. And if there's these people using your taxpayer money to build out the stuff that's driving up your power bills, I mean, I think most people in your community will agree that it's bad and will do something about it if people get together.
So let me just switch the topic a little bit, but keep it on Epstein. So, I pushed back against RussiaGate. I was one of the first ones to do that, and I brought in an NSA code breaker who showed me that there's no way Bill Binney, no way Russia could have hacked into the DNC server, which was the basis for RussiaGate. And so when the whole world was pushing RussiaGate, they still do this, people still believe that it's real. I was out there with a handful of other people, and so I know what that's like to take on a very heterodox opinion and push it with facts. And so I did the same thing happened with the Syrian gas attacks, the same thing happened with COVID. The same thing happened with the Ukraine war. The same thing happened with Joe Biden's dementia. But now there's this group of people. There's a group of people. Some of them who are obviously compromised by Israel, but some of them who don't seem to be. But they're trying to dismiss the Jeffrey Epstein files, the Jeffrey Epstein saga. They're trying to say he wasn't working with the intelligence companies, agencies like the Mossad or the CIA. They're saying he wasn't even trafficking. He was only. They're basically pushing the FBI story that he was just doing it to himself, and there's no scandal here, and there's no blackmailing happening. And so there. What do you make of this new kind of? I'm afraid that I'm being the establishment in a sense, right? When I push back against these people who are trying to dismiss the Jeffrey Epstein thing as nothing to see here. And, like for instance, they're trying to do kind of the same thing they did to Pizzagate. And now when we saw the words pizza and grape soda showing up in the Podesta files, emails, and now we're seeing them in the Jeffrey Epstein, and people are well, what do you make of all of that? What do you make of those people doing that? What do you? To me it seems crazy. Is it crazy? Am I the person pushing RussiaGate in this situation, and they're correct? Or do you follow my train of thought?
Yeah, I think a little bit, but you brought up a lot of what I thought were different points. So I guess I'll start in one place. So yes, there have been a decent amount of people that I would argue through bad faith have been claiming to be objective journalists and acting more like defense attorneys as it relates to the Epstein scandal, and only when it became very inconvenient for very powerful billionaires who are known to finance significant portions of alternative media. So, as an example, I will point the finger at Compact Magazine. A lot of this early rhetoric and the instilling of these ideas that Epstein was not engaged in illicit relationships with minors, and that all the victims are liars, and this and that started there. And a lot of the efforts to dismiss Epstein having any intelligence ties have been published there or promoted through there, including one that was written by a Tel Aviv professor. I forget his name, but his argument was basically like, I teach Israeli spies at university, and even though I don't have a national security clearance, the Israeli spies that I teach at my school say Epstein wouldn't have had nothing to do with Israel. So, okay. And then after that was the editor-in-chief of Compact teamed up with Michael Schellenberger to write another very interesting piece claiming that Epstein had no intelligence ties, even though, I think a year or so ago, maybe more, Schellenberger had suggested that perhaps maybe, Epstein was involved with intelligence agencies in some capacity, but he says the Epstein files show nothing to that effect. And I thought, I openly criticized it on Twitter at the time and gave, several points why I just thought the argument made no sense, and it's been a few months since I've read that article and looked at the tweet I made, but as I recall, it was something like that these people were expecting that the Epstein releases, which aren't the entirety of the Epstein files, some mainstream media estimates it's 2% of all the documents the federal government has that on Epstein that have been released. So a small amount have been released. One, two, it only covers some emails. It's not every email address that Epstein used. It's not a full cover. It's not full coverage of all his communications ever. And it really covers just this one email that he used when he was mainly at the Virgin Islands, JEE vacation, right? So that became his main base in 2009. So it's perhaps offers better coverage from 2009 on, but before that, arguably not. And also, I think it's very silly for people to expect that in the releases that this government would let out, there would be something like, hey Jeffrey, thanks so much for all the work you've done with us. You're the best. Love the CIA and Mossad and MI6. Because that's not how this shit works. And if you think someone that was involved with intelligence would use like a Yahoo or Gmail account for this stuff, I mean, come on.
I mean, they're not all as dumb as Podesta.
Yeah, and so that basically sort of comes down to most of the Schellenberger argument, but a lot of his, he conveniently omits things like the Southern Air Transport situation with Epstein and Wexner, and several, other really key data points to making the argument, for intelligence ties. But again, I mean, it's more complicated than just that too, because I basically wrote a very large book that got divided into 2 books by my publisher about Epstein and the intelligence connections. And so basically what I argue about is that there's this transnational group that Epstein was part of, but he wasn't the head of it. He's like middle management in it at best. And that these people exert influences over many governments, and they are not really overseen by any national government, nor really loyal to any of them, and that they're basically one of the de facto ways our world is actually governed, as opposed to the public governments that we all know, which have basically been reduced to enabling environments for the policies made by these other people that are then filtered down through think tanks or philanthropic foundations. Think the Gates Foundation, for example. And so, like, if you look at Epstein as a microcosm of this, like, he was setting up a lot of these philanthropic foundations that influence policy. He was doing a lot of shady financial stuff, helping powerful people hide their taxes so they don't have to pay it. He was money laundering. And so a lot of these things don't get prosecuted when they're done by very powerful people in the United States. And it's interesting, too, that one of the funds that Epstein was involved setting up was actually handling money for our current Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. And he refuses to release Epstein's Treasury records, even though Congressman Ron Wyden asked that they do so, and he introduced the Released Epstein Treasury Records Act to Congress. Haven't heard very much about that lately, but I really hope it passes, because people deserve to see what was going on there, but I have a feeling it won't. And so, these oligarchs that people like Epstein front for are not accustomed to ever being held accountable for anything. So Wexner is a good example of that, but I don't think it's exclusive to him. And so a key actor in this network testified to Congress in the early 70s about what was going on with this group, and I think he really gave it away, but they didn't care. It's really brazen, frankly. It's Samuel Pisar, who was a lawyer. He's best known now as Anthony Blinken's stepfather, but he was Robert Maxwell's lawyer and very close friend, and involved with basically what he said was building up commerce relations between the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc during the Cold War. And basically what he argued in the early 70s to Congress is that what was happening was the creation of a trans-ideological corporation that was becoming the de facto power in the world, making the nation state irrelevant. So what he meant by trans-ideological corporation is that it was capitalist Western multinational corporations entering into joint venture with communist state-owned corporations, and that these forces were essentially joining hands and creating a structure of governance that was really running the world, of economic governance. So you see it back then in the early 70s being told to Congress, we're making a sovereign corporation, a Sovcorp, that runs everything. And it doesn't matter what national governments do. National governments bow to us. And so I would argue that that's what Epstein was really working for. And I think if you look at intelligence agencies, let's take the CIA, for example, they serve those same masters. The CIA is not the top of the food chain. For example, if you look at the early coups of the CIA, who were they?
Paying it forward is the most important thing.
Well, in Iran in 1954, it was for Anglo-American Oil. In Guatemala, it was for United Fruit Company. The list goes on and on of all the U.S. corporations or multinational corporations that led our intelligence services to, finance and foment, coup d'etats in foreign countries.
The CIA is basically economic hitmen. Would that be?
Well, I think they have many purposes beyond that, but that's absolutely one of them. And they also do regime change operations, and a litany of other bad things.
But the regime change are almost always at the
behest of corporations. Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. Because what we're really talking about are the oligarchs. They're the ones really in charge. Intelligence agencies work for them. Another example with Israeli intelligence is that a former Mossad director that was close to Robert Maxwell was talking about this Israeli billionaire who was based in China named Shaul Eisenberg, and he said, we don't really know if Shaul Eisenberg works for Mossad or if Mossad works for him. I'm paraphrasing. But basically, a lot of these intelligence agencies front for the oligarchs that are controlling in any given country, and they're government at any given time,
Yeah.
right?
So so let me just get back to there's so many, uh, back to the original question. So what do you think? What goes through your mind when you see prominent journalists, um, completely acting like defense attorneys
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I
For
forgot
Jeffrey
my main
Epstein.
point in
Yeah.
bringing up Compact Magazine, Jimmy. Sorry about that. Yeah,
But let me
blame
just-
sleep deprivation. I have 3 kids under 9.
No problem. Let me just say so. And you see these journalists acting like defense attorneys for Jeffrey Epstein, but like instead of them screaming, this is the biggest tell. Instead of them screaming for the rest of the emails and files to be released, which at the very least 50% of them are still secret and are being controlled by the government. Instead of screaming that we need to see those, they're screaming at everybody to shut up and quit asking any questions about it because there's nothing to see there. What goes through your mind when you see them do that?
Well, I think it's pretty telling, as you just pointed out. If you really wanted to get to the bottom of this, wouldn't you want to have all the information available at your disposal?
Yes.
It seems like public transparency. It's always in the public interest to have maximum transparency. And it's interesting too. Sort of the argument being made is that Epstein was taken down by the federal government because of if you believe these people, all these women who lie, who pretend to be victims. But there's no interest from those people in trying to find out why the federal government would want to take Epstein down if it wasn't because of those women.
Right. And
no interest at all. What do you know?
No interest. And I don't know if you saw.
But to the defense attorney point, the point I meant to make about Compact Magazine, which I mentioned earlier, has been where this really started and has been blowing this up since then, is its funding sources. Who funds Compact Magazine? It's funded by the Soros family, and it's funded by Peter Thiel. So Peter Thiel went around very publicly and claimed that he didn't really know Epstein very well, and it was Reid Hoffman's fault they ever met. And then the Epstein releases came out, and it showed that they were business partners. They were chummy. They liked to meet up together on many occasions, and they wanted to start a secret society together. I guess they didn't know each other at all and didn't really like each other very much, right? So anyway, Peter Thiel is a liar, and he's lied on camera about it and hasn't been really held accountable. Instead, he's going around the world lecturing on the Antichrist and how the Antichrist might want to stop AI and AI data centers. Okay, Peter. So beyond that, on the other end, you have the Soros family, and so we're all familiar now. It's been out for a long time since Nick Bryant published it via Gawker, the Epstein Black Book, right?
Yeah.
And so if you look at that Black Book, the person who is responsible for taking it from Epstein's house, his former butler, who is now deceased, circled several names that he said would be key to solving the case. And a lot of those have panned out quite well. Ghislaine Maxwell, Jean-Luc Brunel, Leslie Wexner, Ehud Barak, the Dubins. There's a lot of names circled there, but there's some names that haven't really been followed up on by federal authorities, one of which is Peter Soros. What do you know? And Peter Soros is George Soros' nephew. He's in charge, or was in charge for a long time, of the family's London office. Who was running key parts of the Soros' family London portfolio for decades and decades? Our current Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent.
This is unbelievable. Honest to God, this is mind-blowing.
It's true, though. It's true.
I know. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just
and then, a lot of the other people in the sphere that have sort of taken on the stance, like let's take Schellenberger, and I guess Matt Taibbi, for example. These are people that in the Twitter files became somewhat close to and arguably protective of, in some ways, of Elon Musk, right? And Elon Musk is also a person who's been very embarrassed by the releases in the files because he made very public statements about how Trump was in the files and that's not why they were being released, and made a lot of stuff about standing with victims and Epstein is the worst guy ever and we we have to release the files, this and that. A lot of the rhetoric you saw from people in 2024 from these top politicians or top figures in the government that have now totally 180'd since then. Oddly enough, like Trump, who, it's now a hoax or whatever. But until that rhetoric was coming from these powerful people, this line of argumentation from these people has been, it happened only after that, right? So a lot of these people that were, relatively, arguably could owe a decent amount of their more current fame to Elon Musk have sort of also stepped up to the plate. But Musk was embarrassed because he claimed he didn't have anything to do with Epstein. It was photobombed by Ghislaine Maxwell and all of this, and it's come out to the contrary that was not true, and he was desperately trying to go to the island on Christmas Day, to the wildest party. I mean, you're not against that stuff if that's what you're asking for. And he also met with Epstein, and I actually knew this like years ago when I did interviews talking about my book back in like 2022 or 2023, where I'm like, Elon Musk is lying about his Epstein ties. I don't know. So, this was known, but I guess, these people acted like it wasn't. And then when it gets found out and it's inconvenient for, these two big tech oligarchs who fund a lot of either independent media or alternative media platforms, or in some cases were intimately connected to the fame of certain journalists, they start, it's Russiagate. There's nothing to see here. Pretty much all of these journalists a few years ago were outraged by the Epstein scandal. So it's been an interesting trajectory. As far as the Twitter files journalists in general, it's been a pretty interesting trajectory. I mean, look at Barry Weiss.
Well, they've all become Israel defenders. It's really weird, right? Like Barry Weiss, the top one. I mean, but that was already known before. That she was a toady for Israel. I like to use that term. But I don't know if you saw Schellenberger on Joe Rogan a week or two ago, and he was.
I watched a few clips, but it was hard.
It was brutal. Joe, just like with Barry Weiss, Joe just dismantled him just by asking normal questions that anybody off the street would ask. And it just, a guy who's supposed to be an expert on this subject and a prominent journalist just gets completely dismantled by Joe Rogan, a guy who announces people fighting in cages. And so it just shows you that they're just full of shit on purpose. And the only connection I can make is Israel, through all of them. Do you make that connection?
Well, I would say, look at what's happening in the American media landscape right now. So it's not being controlled by big tech oligarchs like the ones we've all been talking about today. It's about to be all pretty much controlled by the Ellison family. And I have a feeling that if you want to be on the Ellison family-owned network, you probably have to like Israel, because they're they're rabid Zionists. And it wasn't Larry Ellison so much directly in Trump's first term, it was longtime Oracle president Safra Catz, who was very involved in Trump's first term. She's actually the one that got H.R. McMaster fired as National Security Advisor by going through Sheldon Adelson, who was her friend, and saying that John Bolton should be hired.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so these are people that have been influencing Trump for a long time, and he seems to be involving himself in allowing them to expand their media empire, even though it would normally be, antitrust laws would normally come into play.
Normally.
But it's not really convenient. Larry Ellison was also just added to this new board of science advisors that Trump made, and he has some very disturbing quotes about mass surveillance, such as, citizens better be on their best behavior once AI is surveilling everybody, and I guess that means they have to watch what they say about his favorite neo-colonial ethno-state pet project.
Yeah. Yes. All right. Any comments on the World War III?
Oh man, that's very open-ended. I think this was clear at the end of Trump's first term, if not earlier than that this is where Trump was going to take it because the people he puts in charge, just like he did in his first term, are rebranded neocons. And they are going to try and wealth transfer through endless wars. And if it's not just endless wars, it will be the downstream economic devastation that the destabilizing effect of this war will have on oil markets that will cause a lot of problems for the rest of us, but not like Trump, not for Trump and his billionaire friends, or for the people that are insider trading the information on Polymarket, where insider trading is now legal, or on Kalshi, where Don, which is also a prediction market where people can bet on world events, and Don Jr. is on the board of that, I believe. So, it's basically plutocracy, and unfortunately, the U.S. and Israel have horrendous track records when it comes to civilian deaths, and it's nasty and terrible and makes me sick to my stomach that so many innocent people
Hold
are
on a
dying so
second.
the rich can get richer.
Yeah, we did a random. Someone suggested or requested, I should say, John L. Mackenzie. It's titled A Theology of the Old Testament. This is a very good book. Page 150. It's an interesting read. 1974, Doubleday and Company Incorporated, Garden City, New York. I'll read just the first paragraph here. On page 150, hold on, the sentence starts on the previous page. It would be foolish, as well as dishonest, to pretend it would be foolish. Sorry, I have to adjust the light. It's having a hard time seeing that. 1 second. It would be foolish, as well as dishonest, to pretend that the expressions of Yahweh's saving powers and will in the Old Testament always rise above religious and ethnic narrowness. One may as well admit the obvious fact that many ancient Israelites and some of their scribes believed that the saving power and will of Yahweh were directed exclusively to the people of Israel. Belief in salvation needs other themes, has counterweights, and the heaviest counterweight to this particular theme is the theme which we shall discuss in section 5 below, titled Judgment. Here's section 4, the land of Israel, page 150. We return here to a theme introduced in section 2 of this chapter, promise and fulfillment. The promise, we noticed, had two elements: a numerous progeny and possession of the land. Unless the progeny were numerous, the possession of the land could not be guaranteed. Even in the earliest Israelite literature, it is evident that the importance of the land for the lasting identity of the people were recognized. It is a fact, although one can hardly credit the Israelite scribes with the insight, that nomadic tribes did not make history. It is not only that their instability works against their lasting importance, it is also that nomadic tribes can preserve the memory of their deeds only by oral tradition. They do not build lasting monuments. Furthermore, tribal societies all over the world assure their survival by a close fidelity to an established and traditional routine of life. In the deserts, the jungles, and the Arctic wastes of the globe, the trifle with the routine of survival is to flirt with death. Tribal societies do not make history because they refuse adventure. The necessity of adventure, such as migration, is a crisis in tribal life which is recognized as the danger of extinction. This does not imply the literal death of the members of the tribe. It has often meant the loss of identity, either by merger with another tribe or by absorption into civilized communities. Tribal societies may and do outlive civilizations just because they adhere to proved routines and do not take the demonic risk of civilized man. But in direct confrontation, the tribal society is no match for the civilized community. Someone is speaking about the praising of the land and things like that, and how some are saying they were necessarily speaking of the importance of caring for the land in general, toiling the soil so you can grow stuff to survive. Right, maybe that kind of stuff. I agree. I think many over the years have agreed. That's kind of the basis of a lot of those early teachings and the reasoning for a lot of documenting, encyclopedias, dictionaries, Bibles, documentations, logs, files, records. Yeah, it's incredible, really, when you think about just speech in general, language. So many different languages here on this planet. When you think about world news and how many countries and places there are, and it does seem interesting that within our scope of news, the handfuls of places that seem to be talked about more so often than others, whether it's for vacationing purposes and how beautiful and wonderful the place is, or how horrible crime, violence, drugs. It's interesting, to say the least. Yeah, I think the greenhouses are great. Have you seen those places? I know some schools have put greenhouses on the roofs, and they use solar panels too. They have regular, of course, backup and stuff, but they do also use the solar panels, which is great. It saves them money. Yeah, why not have both? Some have 3 or 4 different sources of power. It's pretty cool. You do? Yeah, those places. Yeah, there's some gyms and stuff, the exercise bikes, they generate power. I know, some places that were actually storing power boxes and selling them. Or just using them. I kid you not. Okay, that's a total lie. It's actually true. No, I made it up. I don't know, you should look into it. Is it a thing? Nice shoes. I really like those shoes. Yeah, that's cool. I really hope so. Yeah, we're here for sure. That would be great. Thank you. Alright, we're going to keep listening to this.
So do you think Joe Kent is one of those?
Well, so before this era, they had the domestic terror threat they were trying to put in front of you were obviously these groups of like feds, like Patriot
Yes.
Front
Patriot
and
Front.
the Proud Boys
Yes.
and all of that. Okay, so how if you can't fake the demographic, how do you engineer the demographic?
And sense. So you think
Does
that's
that make sense? So basically, if you have Trump officials that are
Do you
part of
remember
this
this video?
apparatus claiming
These guys.
right-wing anti-Semites are domestic terrorists that need to be targeted by this infrastructure and the surveillance infrastructure in Ukraine and all of that, all part of this buildup of the war on domestic terror. And then you have people coming out being like, we're going to let people,
Let your backbone slip.